A gente vai fazer.
You know, we have an expression in Hollywood. You say, give it a minute for technical difficulty. I'm working on that. That's it. Please, thank you.
Não, achei que você ia Você quer gravar aí?
Bom dia a todos. Gostaria de cumprimentar a mesa da pessoa do Dr. Donald Burris, da historiadora e diretora executiva do Museu Judaico de São Paulo, doutora Roberta Alexandr Sundfeld, do professor da PUC de Minas Gerais, Dr. José Alfredo Baracho Júnior, da doutora Carolina, do colega Juíza Federal, aqui representando a Justiça, Escola, dizer que é uma honra para a Escola de Magistrados da Justiça Federal da Terceira Região recebermos aqui para falar de um tema tão interessante, tão palpitante, para quem assistiu o filme, a maneira responsável, a estratégia traçada, como foi o caso conduzido pelo Dr. Donald Burris, isso desperta a vontade de ouvi-lo, saber um pouquinho mais sobre esse caso. Nós estamos com o tempo um pouco limitado, então nós vamos dividir da seguinte maneira: o Dr. Donald Burris vai falar um pouco, depois o professor José Alfredo e também a doutora Roberta. O Dr. Donald, ele é formado em Direito pela Faculdade de Direito da Universidade de Georgetown, é oficial de gabinete do juiz James Browning, do Tribunal Minor Circuit, professor universitário em renomadas universidades. Durante 36 anos foi advogado atuante em tribunais e na área de direito empresarial. Desde 1987 tem atuado como assistente da magistratura no Superior Tribunal da Califórnia, sócio do escritório de advocacia Burris, Schoenberg em Walden, especializado em fusões e aquisições, e nos últimos anos realizou o trabalho de rastrear e recuperar obras de arte e outros bens confiscados por autoridades nazistas antes e durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial. O caso mais conhecido é justamente o que nós vamos tratar aqui, são os quadros do pintor Gustav Klimt, que estavam em posse do governo austríaco, mas que na verdade pertenciam a pessoas que contrataram o escritório para recuperar as obras. Então, sem mais delongas, eu passo a palavra ao Dr. Donald.
Okay, I don't know exactly what you said about me, but hopefully it's fine. I appreciate it. It's a real honor to be here and to be before federal court personnel. Many years ago, before some of you were born, I was a law clerk on a federal court in California. And so I know what the federal courts are like, how prestigious they are, and how interesting it is to work for those courts. I'd like to thank the judge, as well as all the people I met last night who helped organize this, for inviting me. Brazil is my second favorite country, so I'm glad to be here. Partly, but I've lived in the United States for so long that I just have to keep it first. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoy your people. I enjoy your outlook on life, and I'm glad to be down here. I've been to many countries talking about the subject that I'm about to talk about today. I appreciate the fact that in the morning, instead of just having a long breakfast, you filled the room and came to hear me talk. Hopefully, it will be worthwhile. I'll do my best. As far as what I'm going to be talking about, you know, it's not keep it first. It's not my pieces that I'm emphasizing here. Instead, I'm sorry. Can you hear? It's okay. Okay. What I'm here really to talk about is how important it is all over the world to protect culture and to prevent any society from having their culture threatened, wiped out. We see it now in the Middle East. You know, you saw it in Iraq and other places like that. We see it in Africa, Sudan, Rwanda, and the like. So I think we all should be vigilant wherever we live and whatever we're doing to be sensitive to this. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for this subject to be talked about is to keep the word out as far as letting people know what can happen if it isn't controlled in terms of what goes on. On a side note, I happen to be a member of the Jewish faith, and so I had relatives, like so many people did, who unfortunately perished in the camps, not close relatives in my case. But so there's a certain personal meaning to what I'm talking about, but it extends way beyond just discrimination against Jews. Okay? I also have to apologize because many of you may have seen the movie Monuments Men with George Clooney. Okay? The problem is when people invite me to come, somehow the people who are coming think they're going to see George Clooney. Now, I ask you, use your imagination, okay? He happens to be someone I know, and it's funny because I once told that joke when I was filling in for George and speaking before an entertainment group in Los Angeles. But there were, of course, two movies. The first one was the George Clooney movie on the Monuments Men, and I will talk about the Monuments Men a little bit later. And the second movie was the one that we showed last night, Women in Gold. If you haven't seen it, you really ought to see it. I have to explain to you that if you're looking for me, I'm on the cutting room floor, okay? I'm one of these actors who they don't show. They showed you my partner, Randy Schoenberg. They forgot to tell you that for 10 years he had a partner named Donald Burris. So that's my role to play in terms of what's happening. And Randy, after the case, decided that he would retire. He's much younger than I am, but he decided he would retire. So he left to me the projects of taking the cases all over the world and then also speaking to people. So that's what I'm doing here in terms of hopefully accomplishing something. I got into this field, and those of you who are younger lawyers or younger judges or starting careers or the like, you're probably interested in how do you get into the career of being a rooted art lawyer. It was a complete accident in my case, except for my wife who was in Brazil and has traveled with me and loves Brazil. This is her first trip. It's my second. But basically, I got into this by accident. About 20 years ago, I walked into an elevator in my building. Have you seen Women in Gold, any of you? So you remember Randy Schoenberg is the lawyer they featured. So I walk into an elevator 20 years ago in my building, and I see Randy Schoenberg, who I knew. His father was a judge and a friend of mine. And I said, Randy, how you doing? He said, well, I'm not doing so good. I opened a practice on my own. I'm not really getting the clients. I'm upstairs. I'm not with a law firm or anything. I said, Randy, I tell you what, I am so busy right now. I need your help. I said, come on down. And although you're theoretically, in theory, one of my tenants, really you'll be a lawyer in the firm. And he came down, he did some good work, and one day, about 6 months later, I gave him a good portion of the firm, and about 6 months later, he came down and said, you know, Don, I want to discuss with you, I have a Jewish case, is the way he described it. And I said, oh, what's it about? He told me about the Cliff case. He told me that everyone had told him it wasn't going to get anywhere. They called him Don Quixote. So he said, now that I can have Don Burris as a partner, we can both be Don Quixotes, in a sense. And so he asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, sure. Not thinking it would go anywhere or anything else like that, but thinking that it made some sense in terms of what happened. And I'll talk about the case in the context of our work. So that started it, brought Randy into the firm, and from that time, for 20 plus years, a good portion of my practice has been as a looted art attorney. And what that means is you represent claimants all over the world who have lost art or other sorts of cultural properties, to some extent business and real estate, but that's a much more difficult task. But basically trying to get compensation back for the theft. Now, when we talk about the Nazis, this is the biggest property theft in the history of the world. You can't imagine, you know, during the years the Nazis were in power between, say, 1933 and 1945, it's been estimated that the Nazis stole 1/3 of all the valuable art in Europe. You know, so one out of every 3 pieces, one out of every $3 was basically given to Nazis. And then, on top of everything else, I don't know if you read about this. Did you read? By the way, do you want to say the translation of this? Oh, is it being translated?
Todo mundo está conseguindo compreender, até que porque o Dr. José Alfredo está lá resolvendo a questão dos slides, mas está dando para compreender?
Okay. In any event, I'll be here this afternoon and give a repeat performance, okay? Somebody in Portuguese. But this is such a large seizure, and so much money was stolen, and so many lives were affected. And of course, one of the reasons why you didn't hear that much about it after World War II is that if anybody survived the Holocaust, that was if they lived through it, they'd be lucky. And if they could find some relatives, they'd be lucky. So the people were not as concerned about art and about getting back property at that time. It was only later on where they decided to try to restore it. And I'm happy to say that it was governed in part by lawyers, not just in America, but all over the world. It's a very small group of lawyers who practice in this field. You know, you almost count them on your hands. I always call it a small fraternity and sorority. There aren't too many of us, but they're pretty dedicated people. And we sometimes represent the auction houses, and we represent the galleries and collectors, but some of them would hire you to be honest. In other words, we want you to evaluate our case. We think we can defend our right to have the property. We think that the claimant is not right. So please be objective and try to help us along those lines. So this is sort of the background in terms of what I do. And the cases, and the Altman case took, as you know, about 10 years, and that's kind of average. We're in the federal courts right now, in fact, in California, with a case that has gone up to the Federal Court of Appeals 3 times. And it just was argued again, so it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. In the case involving Woman in Gold and involving Maria Altman, in that case, we truly believe that the Austrians were motivated in part by the fact that Maria was in her 90s, and they figured they could outlive her in terms of what happened. As you saw in the film, which I'll talk about, that has some relevance to what happened. Do you know if Jose went to the local bar, or did he just go to take care of his slide? Anybody know? Jose? Can we get the first slide? Oh, he's working on it. We'll work around it. I wanted to start with something. I always, when I talk about looted art and I describe this area to people like you that are intelligent and very interested in it, I always start by talking for a moment about Maria Altman. And what I was hoping was that we had the first slide, which had Maria's picture, real picture. Helen Mirren did a good job in the movie, but it doesn't look exactly like Maria Altman. So we'll show. You have to imagine the pictures of it. We could never have succeeded in that area. I could never have, pardon the expression, the reputation I have, without the clients. People like Maria, who were so dedicated to what they wanted to do, and so persevering, and so courageous. Incredible people, and it's a lesson in life. You know, I practiced law for almost 48 years. There's a lot of people in the room that are younger than 48, I realize that. So it's a long time. In 48 years of practicing law, I never had the same experience, the same positive and wonderful experience that I had when we told Maria that she won her case. You cannot imagine what she said and what she did and what she looked like or what we reacted to at that time. So as lawyers, you know, as judges, you know when you've done the right thing, how good it feels. It felt very good in that regard. So we tried. Now, unfortunately, we don't win all our cases. By the way, I'm going to tell you something, okay? I'm sorry to have to tell you this. You probably met some American lawyers who told you they win all their cases, okay? They're full of malarkey, okay? Which is a nice word for you to imagine. Nobody wins all their cases. And if they tell you they do, there's a reason for their bragging or something else like that. So the best you can do is put up the right fight and the like. The other thing is, in American law, particularly in this area, with the length of the cases, the age of the people you're representing, and the like, you want to be very careful to try to settle the cases if you possibly can. Negotiate a settlement. If you have to go to court, then you really have not won in one sense, even if you win at the end. But in Maria's case, they forced us into the courts. The Supreme Court opinion in the Altman case, the We're Going to Go case, is the only time the American Supreme Court, which is the highest level court, you do the same thing, don't you? We got the Supreme Court at the top of all the, you have state courts and federal courts. It's the only time in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a Holocaust survivor was entitled to property. So it's a really an earth-shaking case at its time, and it really represents something quite special in that regard. Why, in addition to wanting to tell a story, in addition to meeting such nice people and being in a prestigious company like this one, you know, you may wonder, how come you're sitting up there talking about events that occurred 80 years ago? Because they still have a relevance. You know, I don't know if it's true in Brazil, but certainly in the American newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the like, there's always a story. Every month there's a story that an artwork was found, there's a story that there's a case going on and the like. So this is something that's a very current, really current interest in terms of what happens. And so people tend to be interested in it. It's not an old case. But because it's so many years, then the people who are defending the right of the collectors to hold on to the paintings often invoke the statute of limitations. You have that right. Statute of limitations, which is, as you know, probably the same in Brazil, it imposes a time limit on how long you can file suit. So that the passage of time can affect that. I don't know if you read about this, but a few years ago, there was a headline article all over the world about a man in Munich, Germany. Did you read about this? And a man turned out to be an older man, and they arrested him for carrying euros across into the trains and the like, you know, going across countries. Apparently they have a rule like in America where you can't take more than 10,000, and somehow they felt that when you added up all the money he'd taken, he was violating currency laws. Anyway, so they seized him, the German police did, they questioned him, and then ultimately they searched his apartment sometime later. They found 1,400 valuable pieces of art. They, you know, it could be worth in modern terms millions and millions and millions of dollars, depending on what the market was like. And it turned out that all the cases that we do have a story, which is the other reason why they're relatively interesting in terms of talking about that. In this case, his father was the favorite agent of the Nazis for selling paintings. I mean, you know, the Nazis, in addition to stealing the paintings from the Jewish people, in addition to exterminating and killing Jewish people, The Nazis made a lot of money selling the paintings. You know, they would say, oh, this is a terrible painting. It's a degenerate painting. We don't want anybody to see it, you know? And then they turn around and sell it for millions of dollars through France, or Portugal was neutral at the time, or even secretly in the United States and the like. So they made a lot of money selling this artwork. By the way, speaking of degenerate art, what happened was a lot of the art that was seized and told by everyone, by the Nazis, it was degenerate. Nobody should see it. But Goebbels, the really bad Nazi, the public relations guy, said, you know what? I think we ought to do something. We ought to have 2 shows in Germany, 2 art shows. One of them should be a show of degenerate art at just a terrible gallery, you know, where the bathrooms don't work or whatever else like that. And then we'll show the really important Nazi stuff, you know, the soldiers and the women in the field and the like. We'll show that in a beautiful modern gallery. Well, what happened was, this is the late 1930s, 7 times as many people attended the gallery for the degenerate art as the other one, so Goebbels shut everything down. He didn't really like what was going on. The fate of much of the property that was stolen is not all that known, because some of it was destroyed. At last count, some years ago, a prediction by a man that I know, Mark Mazeroski, who works in this field, was that there were 100,000 of these pieces unaccounted for. Doesn't mean that they're out there, but many may be. And the other thing is, where do you find them? I'm going to tell you the story of Monuments Men in a second. But these paintings were located at the Jeu de Paume in Paris, where there was a staging for a lot of paintings. If you saw Monuments Men, you saw the story, you know. Matt Damon was not actually in the war, but he played a listening who was there in terms of what's happening. And I have to tell you the truth, the lady who was a great hero, Rosalind, didn't look exactly like the actress in the movie. But other than that, they told a pretty good story of the Monuments Men in terms of what was happening. So a lot of paintings came through there, and a lot of paintings were, as I say, stored in salt mines. This is, you met Jose, right? How are we doing, buddy? Good.
I'm in the green TI.
Could you put the first one on, if you don't mind? Yeah. Oh, wait, this one? First one.
Primeiro, por favor.
Thank you so much. You know, I know a little Spanish. I was going to say gracias.
Obrigado.
Thank you. Obrigado. Let's see. It is coming on right over there. Okay. Jose, by the way, is a good friend of mine. And in addition to being a leading lawyer in Belo Horizonte, he is a filmmaker and a film producer, and he works with a lot of my clients. So, this is the title. I basically call it The Tragedy to Triumph, Reflections on Litigating Looted Recollections of the cases I'm talking about. This is what I wanted to show at the beginning. This is the real Maria. Oh, that's it. One of the most spectacular human beings I've ever met in my life. Now, I don't know all of you, so I'm sure you're probably equally spectacular. Right now, really good. Just an incredible person. She died a few years ago, and I'm happy to tell you that her son, who I knew pretty well, she had a couple of kids, told me that, you know, just before she died, she mentioned to her children how happy she was that her firm had done what it did, how good she felt about everything. You know, people want to know, for example, why our clients don't want to put the paintings on their walls, you know, after they get them back. Because it's not just because they get a valuable amount of money for it, and most of them are not that wealthy, but it's also because it's totally impractical. I mean, can you imagine you just were awarded the rights to a $135 million painting, and you're going to put it on the wall for your garage, you know, something like that, and you're going to tell your kid or your grandchild, don't touch that, you know, you're worth so much.
Vocês acham que ajuda se eu for aos pouquinhos traduzindo? Sim. Ah, então. Ele está dizendo, por que os clientes não colocam os quadros nas suas casas? Né? Aí está falando do problema que seria colocar um quadro que vale mais de 100 milhões de dólares, né, na parede da sua casa. Ficaria deslocado.
José, coloca em forma
Não está comigo, tá? Na verdade, o arquivo ele foi transferido para lá. Mas eu posso fazer isso por aqui? Acho que não.
Oh, sorry. It's okay otherwise, or you can see it, right? Let's go to the next one.
Próximo slide, por favor.
I'd like to use the slides now that we have them as a backdrop to what I was talking about. So remember, the last thing that I mentioned to you was that we were talking about where paintings were found in the like. Well, let me tell you this, although I'm not George Clooney, as I admitted, let me tell you the story of the Monuments Men very quickly in terms of what they were. They actually were a division of the United States Army that was set up just after the war began. And so it was tough fighting at the time and everything else like that. But both President Roosevelt and General Eisenhower agreed that they had to have a way of preserving culture, which is interesting. You're fighting a war for your lives. Pearl Harbor, we had such a bad experience, and yet the people in charge in America, I'm proud to say, recognized the need to try to protect cultural monuments and the like. And there was a group of hundreds and hundreds of these soldiers. They were all assigned to the regular army. They carried guns and the like, but their job was mainly to make sure that they could protect cultural property. And as the Allies were winning the war, then they would try to get the properties themselves back in some way. And that's the story in terms of what they did. It's not fair to call them monuments men. There were some very capable monuments women, so we're going to call them monuments people, okay? But they really did a good job in terms of what was happening.
Okay. Bom, durante e após a Segunda Guerra Mundial, havia pontos de vista divergentes nos Estados Unidos a respeito da recuperação de obras de arte. Então, o presidente dos Estados Unidos, né, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, e o então general, depois presidente Eisenhower, eles divergiam sobre isso porque significaria destacar um grupo de soldados preparados para o combate com o objetivo de recuperar a propriedade privada, quadros que pertenciam a particulares. Então havia uma divisão nos Estados Unidos. Entretanto, apesar desse destacamento, né, que está retratado no filme ter sido designado, ele foi um destacamento com papel, pelo menos do ponto de vista do aporte que o poder público forneceu a eles, bastante secundário.
Next slide. Slide?
Próximo slide.
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
Jose! Okay. My wife is hidden in the audience, so she's here right now. Someone who organized something in New York. The reason I have this picture, the man that is second there, the man next to me, is the last surviving monuments man. His name was Harry Edliger, at least the last surviving one who's capable of talking and coming on shows. It was funny, when I organized it, I was speaking in New York, and Harry lives in New Jersey. And his agent, he goes around speaking, said, the only problem is Harry is widowed, and he's interested in all women between 18 and 80. So tell him to be careful and be ready.
Esse senhor está à direita dele, na foto, dos que participavam desse destacamento do exército americano para recuperar obras de arte que haviam sido roubadas pelos nazistas, né? E ele disse também que ele era um homem muito interessado em mulher.
If you saw the movie, Harry's role was the German immigrant who came to America, settled in New Jersey with his parents. He had the last legal bar mitzvah in Germany before Kristallnacht, the last one that they could do. They got out. In fact, the family was supposed to leave in about a week, and their rabbi came to the door and said, get out of here today. Take one suitcase and go. It's very dangerous. So he came over to New Jersey,
Esse senhor ele é originário da Alemanha, foi para os Estados Unidos com a sua família e ele teve, na verdade, uma oportunidade que muitos não tiveram, que foi de sair, ainda que apenas com uma pequena mala, mas teve a oportunidade de sair da Alemanha e ir para os Estados Unidos e se estabelecer no estado de Nova Jersey.
And Harry's role in the movie, which was accurate, he joined the army as a young man, and he was in Europe, and he was assigned just to a regular unit, and somebody found out he could speak German, obviously, because he grew up there, and he became a monuments man. And a great story about Harry is, as the monuments men were going through Europe, he got back to his hometown. He discovered in a church steeple some very valuable works that had been taken from his grandfather when they still lived in Germany. And so he had, and the Jewish people were never allowed to see that until then. And Harry found it, and it was a very emotional experience.
Esse senhor Harry, ele foi enviado, né, destacado para essa missão, porque ele supunha-se que ele falava alemão, por ser originário da Alemanha, né, ao mesmo tempo, ele acabou fazendo uma missão na sua própria cidade natal. E na igreja da sua cidade, ele encontrou algumas peças de arte que tinham sido do seu avô, da sua avó, né? O que foi um momento muito emocionante para ele.
Did we say something controversial? Or?
Yeah, they are warning you. I don't know what.
I'm just kidding. The monuments men were directed then to protect culture, and later on to try to get it back. No, Brazil is a very interesting place.
Yeah, very much.
I was trying to tell my wife before she came. Oh, okay. So we should welcome them. Yeah, the judges who are listening, welcome. We got your message. The monuments men protected cultural property and then tried to get it back. The problem was, and it's not a problem, it's just how much could you do? We're fighting a war, we're trying to retrieve it, and unlike in the movie where Matt Damon takes a picture and puts it back on the wall of the house of the family, very little of that was really done. Instead, the monuments men took what they could back to the rightful countries. So if property was stolen from a French family, it would be given to the then government in France, and they were supposed to try to find the rightful owners. Now that depends on the good faith of the governments, and some of the governments after World War II were not acting in good faith. As you know, if you read Holocaust history, what happens to people who come back into life. So they had a limited role, but an important role. And some of our cases right now, including a very big one, are based on the fact that the monuments men gave it back to the government in the country where it was stolen, but we represent individual clients who are trying to get it back from the government. And so we have a few cases like that. We have one in particular involving the man in Munich who had the treasure trove of paintings. He died now, and so people are trying to get back the paintings to rightful owners. And so there's a lot of litigation about that right now because the monuments were only directed to go to a certain point. And of course, how much time could they spend on it?
Okay. Esse destacamento do exército americano, né, que o Donald está chamando de Monuments Men, que é o nome, inclusive, do filme, Caçadores
de obras-primas. Esse filme que ele está se referindo de Monuments são os homens do exército que pertenciam a esse esquadrão.
Oh, I'm sorry. I switch over to
Bom, então, na verdade, eles recuperavam as obras de arte que pertenceram a particulares, mas o exército não tinha condições de entregar essas obras a cada uma das famílias de quem essas obras haviam sido roubadas. Então, o que o exército americano fazia? Esse destacamento recuperava as obras e o governo americano entregava as obras para o governo de cada país dos quais ele entendia aquela obra ter origem. E o papel do escritório do Donald é recuperar essas obras dos governos, porque nem todos os governos que receberam obras recuperadas por esse destacamento do exército americano entregaram, né, aos seus legítimos proprietários. Em alguns casos por má fé, em outros casos por falta de condições ou por não saber exatamente quem seria o proprietário daquela obra de arte.
So the monuments men that we're talking about were directed to return to the countries. We call that external restitution. And then the countries were supposed to deal with the internal restitution, which is one of the major things that we deal with now as literary attorneys in our cases. It's coming up all the time. Let's go to the next slide.
Então havia uma restituição externa, que era do exército para os governos, e a interna, que era no interior de cada estado a devolução para os proprietários particulares.
Now it doesn't want to go away. Okay, just a little bit on Adolf Hitler, as you know, whether from the movie or from history. Hitler was a failed artist. If you want to know why he was a failed artist, take a look sometime at his paintings, which is sometimes on the internet. He'll get these paintings of dogs and other things like that. But he was rejected by the Austrian schools, rejected from painting school when they were there. And he always had in the back of his mind that he was an expert. So when they had a chance to see his paintings, in addition to greed, he did it so that he could make up for the fact that nobody recognized his artistic skills, and he used to go to a lot of these things. He had a very large collection at the Bergestein, which was in the mountains where he had his hideout.
Então o Hitler ele estudou arte, mas não tinha muita aptidão para ser um artista. Ele, inclusive, chegou a ser rejeitado por uma escola de artes plásticas. Então, essa obsessão por confiscar obras de arte dos países invadidos adviria exatamente dessa frustração no passado.
By the way, when we talk about degenerate, in other words, the word that was used by the Nazis about so-called unacceptable paintings, we're talking not just about Jewish artists, we're talking about legendary artists like Picasso, Pizarro, Monet, and things like this. So these were degenerate because the Nazis didn't accept them.
Esse confisco de obras de arte, ele não foi apenas dirigido contra judeus, mas pessoas de todo tipo de religião, nacionalidade, né? Então, várias obras de arte sem qualquer conexão com a cultura judaica foram também confiscadas.
And there's Hitler and his friend Mussolini looking at a statue. They prefer this sometimes to really nice modern art.
Essa é uma foto do Hitler com o Mussolini observando esse monumento, né, essa escultura.
Interestingly enough, while there was some stolen art in Italy, not as much as Germany, not nearly as much.
Não houve tanto confisco ou roubo de obras de arte na Itália como houve na Alemanha.
This picture is in a salt mine, which is where a lot of paintings were found by the monuments men and other people. Just look at that for a second. And the front is General Eisenhower. You may realize he's the president. Behind him is General Patton, and to the side, General Bradford. So these are very high-ranking officials of the American Army, very supportive of finding paintings. There's millions of dollars of paintings right in front of them, just right there in the salt mines. The Germans figured it could survive and they could hide them there. So in addition to collection points, like the Jute bomb. They would put them in salt mines, they would put them in castles, anywhere they could find that they thought would be safe, so to speak.
Então, eles escondiam, os nazistas escondiam essas obras de artes em vários locais, como em Minas, como nesse caso especificamente é uma foto que foi tirada numa mina. À frente está o general Eisenhower, que depois se tornou presidente dos Estados Unidos, no momento em que eles estão registrando essas obras que foram recuperadas e que, segundo o Donald, estão em milhões de dólares nesses quadros que foram encontrados.
Here the generals are looking at some silverware. It's very hard to sue for personal property, like silverware and bracelets and the like, unless you have something like an inscription that says to Joan from Bill with a year. It's very hard. This is an exception. Just go back. So this is an exception where you have the silverware, very valuable, was all together. You could try to restore it to the families. By the way, many times there was nobody to give it to. The whole family had been destroyed, so it was given either to the Jewish community or to some appropriate person. But that's an example of personal property that you can get in theory.
Aí são peças de prata, né, que foram encontradas. Algumas, em alguns casos, era possível devolver ao dono, porque tinha um nome inscrito, mas em outros casos não era possível identificar a quem pertenceriam essas peças que foram encontradas. Algumas são joias, outras não, mas de qualquer forma, em alguns casos era possível identificar o proprietário. E em alguns casos não era possível devolver simplesmente porque a família toda havia sido exterminada durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Example of soldiers looking at something right in the salt mine itself, very valuable. One painting, just an example. There are two members of the monuments men. Some of the monuments men were just regular soldiers, and some were active in art. Some actually had careers running museums and the like and became famous in that area.
Alguns soldados que pertenciam a esse destacamento, Monuments Men, alguns eram soldados apenas, né, mas outros eram pessoas que eram estudiosos de arte, envolvidos com o mundo da arte, até para identificar essas peças que estavam sendo encontradas. Especificamente aquela é uma peça muito famosa de um pintor francês, né, e que vale alguns milhões de dólares.
They were found, you go to the next one, seriously. They were found in church steeples. This was found by not a monuments man, just an ordinary soldier, but very valuable engravings. Go to the next one.
Next one.
Yeah, just about this. This is interesting because it's a Rembrandt, and nobody knew it existed. Nobody knew it. It had been stolen and been taken from a private family, and all of a sudden you had a valuable Rembrandt. That this one actually went back to the relatives of the rightful owner. So it was a good story in terms of what's going on. It was, as I say, an unbelievable amount of art and an unbelievable collection. Now, artwork was taken, obviously, and put in these places. And when we got it back, it was normally given back to the countries of origin. Sometimes the artwork was destroyed. Sometimes it was conscious Nazi policy, and sometimes they were just jerks. There's a famous story of two Nazi soldiers and their French girlfriend going behind the Jode home and destroying a very, very valuable Picasso painting on a Saturday night for fun. I mean, this is the fun the Nazis had.
Bom, esse pequeno quadro é um quadro do Rembrandt que ele não havia nem mesmo um registro sobre a existência dele. Então ele foi descoberto durante essa campanha desse destacamento do exército americano, e esse especificamente foi devolvido para o seu proprietário. Agora, muitas obras não foram recuperadas porque alguns soldados destruíam essas obras simplesmente por diversão, né? Então, nem sempre esse trabalho teve sucesso. Algumas vezes por causa dessa perversidade.
Now, some of the paintings were taken by individual soldiers and put home as souvenirs. I have a good story in that regard.
Okay. Alguns foram os próprios soldados. Ele mostrou a foto de um soldado. Não foram apenas soldados do destacamento Monuments Men que encontraram obras de arte. Havia um destacamento especialmente destinado a isso. Mas as obras eram muitas vezes encontradas em campanha com outros objetivos. Então, muitas vezes os soldados levavam o que encontravam como uma lembrança, como um souvenir da guerra, levavam para casa. E aí ele vai contar um caso interessante a isso.
About 20 years ago, there was a story in an American newspaper about a painting, a very, very valuable painting. And what had happened was a person who was representing, not a lawyer, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the big museum in New York, went to dinner at his friend's house in Brooklyn. Now, I'm from Brooklyn. You ever hear of Brooklyn? Maybe you haven't heard of Brooklyn. Way back over there. And 1 in 7 Americans have had close contact with Brooklyn. We weren't all born there, but I was. Anyway, he went to Brooklyn for dinner, went to visit his friend. And he was going to the men's room. He walks down the hall, and there's a painting. Original oil painting. He looks at it, he looks at it, he looks at it, he says, you know what? There's a painting just like this that Pizarro painted that nobody's found, you know? And his friend says, well, I don't really know anything about the painting, but he said, it was given to me by my Uncle Sam after World War II, you know, like a present given to me. They take the painting off the wall, and it says at the top, to Sophie, with love from Sam, 1945. So Sammy brought a painting home. He went to his wife, you know, maybe it was Mother's Day, whatever it was, hey, put it up and everything else like that. And that's how that painting eventually came back. I mean, they gave it back, but there's this, an interesting story on this one is it worth more money because it has the Sammy inscription, or is it worth less money? But there's all, you know, one of the interesting things about this area, and obviously it's a sad area because, you know, you read about families being destroyed and the like, but as far as human interest goes, as opposed to the normal legal case, there's a lot of human interest and a lot of facts that are important in each case.
Então, o caso que ele conta é que há aproximadamente 20 anos atrás, uma pessoa foi jantar com amigos numa casa no Brooklyn, uma região de Nova York, bairro de Nova York, que inclusive é onde ele nasceu, né? Segundo ele, 1 em cada 7 americanos tem alguma relação com o Brooklyn. E aí, esse senhor, nessa casa, ele foi ao banheiro e viu no banheiro um quadro. Aí ele falou, esse quadro me parece um quadro do Pissarro. E havia uma inscrição no quadro, né? From Sam to Sophie,
With
né?
love.
Com amor, né? Do Sam para Sofia com amor, né? Estava escrito sobre o quadro. Isso não é original do quadro, mas um soldado, uma pessoa que, né, não sabia o valor daquele quadro, trouxe para casa e deu de presente para a namorada dele. E estava no banheiro. Né? E uma questão interessante é, esse quadro vale mais dinheiro por causa da inscrição do Sam para a Sophie ou vale menos dinheiro? É uma questão que o mercado tem que resolver.
In America, and to some extent in Europe, many people go to shows, like antique shows, flea markets, like looking for valuable paintings. So every once in a while you can buy a painting for $50 American. It turns out to be very expensive. Not necessarily looted, but it could be, depending on the history. And just to make a point, at this stage, if you're a collector of important art, and you see the history, we call it provenance, if you see the provenance has gaps between 1933 and 1945, it's very dangerous to buy it. Because you can't get insurance. The insurance won't, you know, just do prohibitive. So you have to be very careful to change the economy in terms of how that goes.
Então, em algumas feiras de arte, né, nos Estados Unidos, você pode encontrar peças que tenham sido recuperadas desse período, né, de 1933 a 1945. Agora, há uma incerteza muito grande em torno disso, né? Qual é o real valor dessas obras de arte. Você pode acabar comprando por um preço superior, né? ou mesmo ter a sorte de comprar alguma coisa que tenha um valor verdadeiro. Né? E ele está dizendo que é muito difícil, é comum nos Estados Unidos obras de arte terem seguro. Né? E isso é um problema também para seguradoras, porque qual é o valor que você vai atribuir àquela obra para estabelecer, né, o valor do prêmio, todas essas questões que envolvem o seguro de obras de arte.
It used to be, for instance, when there was a legal case before a judge, it used to be that the defendant would try to argue, we didn't know. But now, if they should have known, there's a standard also because of everything that's come out. And that's changed, I guess you would call it, we call it burden of proof. But you probably have a similar term in Portuguese. It's changed the outlook when you have a lawsuit. So you really, as a defendant, you can't just say, we didn't know. You have to say, we didn't have reason to know, or interpose other defenses.
Quando essas obras são reivindicadas, né, por alguém que se diz proprietário e está na posse de outra pessoa, né, um argumento de defesa é a pessoa simplesmente dizer que não sabia do valor, não sabia da origem, não sabia que isso tinha sido roubado ou confiscado pelos nazistas, enfim. É o que normalmente os réus costumam alegar nesse tipo de processo.
I'll tell you about this. I have some cases that I'll tell you about. Let's go next one. Now, this slide is here for several reasons. One, I wanted you to meet the real Randy Schoenberg, since you have the real Donald Burris right here. But there's another reason for this slide. Those of you who've seen Women in Gold, right? Okay. You remember Ryan Reynolds played Randy Schoenberg? Good look at that picture. Which one of us looks more like Ryan Reynolds? Right? A little taller, a little more hair.
Ele está dizendo o seguinte, o verdadeiro Randy Schoenberg, né, que está ao lado do Donald nessa foto, né, ele coloca essa foto, né, para
It's a Supreme Court. We're outside the court. It's in the back.
No dia em que aconteceu o julgamento na Suprema Corte, né, mas ele coloca essa foto para mostrar quem realmente se parece mais com o ator do filme. Ele se parece mais, segundo ele, com o ator do filme do que o verdadeiro Randy Schoenberg.
And look, all joking aside, I'm very proud to be Randy's partner. He did a brilliant job, so I'm just being, funny. I'm not trying to say anything.
Brincadeiras à parte, né? Ele tem muito orgulho de ser sócio do Randy porque ele fez um trabalho brilhante nesse caso da dama. Só um detalhe, porque quem não viu o filme, né, o ator que faz o papel do Randy é um autor bem mais alto, bem mais novo, né, bem mais vistoso. Aí é fundamentalmente como ele, like him.
Let me start telling you about the cases themselves, okay? First of all, you're going to see in a minute, actually, you can show all these. You show all five for a second, just let it focus on this. That, of course, is clear. No, you go wrong.
Next one.
Okay. Next one? Second one, stop for a second. Okay, the first one was sold to Ron Lauder, from the movie. And women particularly know Estee Lauder Cosmetics. I was asking last night, apparently there's controversy. I can never tell if Estee Lauder makes men's cosmetics also. I have no idea. Last night, some people said they did, other people said they didn't. So I don't know the answer to that. But this is Ron Lauder. He was very nice about it. He set the price at $135 million before the case was even decided, and that was very fair. Okay. If you go back, no, Women in Gold, the real Women in Gold. I mean, it's a fantastic painting. I'm not saying that because of our case. And it was really interesting to see it. You can now see it at the Newer Gallery in New York, which is a building owned by Ron Lauder. And he runs a museum there. Okay. And I'll tell you a little secret, okay? But don't say you heard it here. Tell him that you're a very good friend of Don Burris. and therefore you want to take advantage of the free admission that Don Burris' friends get. Particularly if you're a judge or somebody important, okay?
Bom, o quadro, né, a Dama Dourada está agora numa galeria em Nova York, né? E se você quiser uma entrada franca, né, nessa galeria, fala que é amigo do Donald Burris, que aí vocês vão
Just
entrar
don't
lá.
go all at once. I mean, that
Vai um de cada vez para não dar muito, né?
Let's go to number 2. Okay. Number 2, Klimt painted Adele in 2 portraits. She's the only woman we know of that he made more than 1 portrait of. This is the second one. This is a little bit more of an Asian theme, obviously, as opposed to woman and girl. Also very nice painting. Now, when the paintings were sold, back to the second. When the paintings were sold, the first one was sold to Ron and just shipped to him. And the other 4 were auctioned at Christie's. You may have Christie's in Brazil as well, big auction house. And when they're auctioned in a place like that, you have agents who raise their hand. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they represent. We found out about 6 months ago who bought this painting. And you know who it was? Oprah Winfrey. Heard of Oprah Winfrey, right? Okay. Oprah Winfrey bought it. Now, she bought it for 80 some odd, about, I think, $80 million. Now, she sold it to a Chinese guy for like $120 million. So Oprah made some money on this painting. We don't know about the others. The other 2 may be anywhere for all we know. They may be in the gallery. They may be with somebody rich in the Middle East. We're not sure as far as that goes. We just don't know.
A Adele Bauer é uma das poucas pessoas que foram retratadas mais de uma vez pelo Gustav Klimt. Então ele mostrou a Dama Dourada, né, e esse outro quadro que tem motivos asiáticos. E esse quadro ele foi adquirido num leilão, numa casa de leilões chamada Christie.
This was Christie's in New York.
New York.
It's everywhere. But
Christie's, então a casa de
Christie's
leilões.
and Sotheby's tend to be the big auction houses for expensive paintings in America.
É uma casa de leilões muito importante, chamada Christie's, em Nova York, também em Londres, não sei, mas e foi adquirido por $80 milhões. Né? E quem adquiriu foi a Oprah Winfrey, aquela apresentadora de TV, né? Future President of the United States. Ela quer concorrer
Now,
à presidência.
I can't get political. Or if I was political, I might say, God willing.
Bom, é porque ela às vezes sinaliza a intenção de candidatar à presidência dos Estados Unidos. Mas foi comprado por ela e depois ela vendeu para o Museu Chinês. Por $120 milhões. Então ela lucrou $40 milhões, o que para ela não significa muita coisa.
Show the next 3 paintings are landscapes. They're very good, actually. They're almost impressionistic, this one, then the next one. This is all part of the package that went before the Supreme Court. Show the next one, too. Kind of pretty. I think it's nice use of colors. Any art questions, go to my wife after this, because I don't know anything.
Ele está dizendo que qualquer questão especificamente sobre arte tem que ser feita para a
José
Patricia,
will translate.
que é a sua esposa. Né? Então, se vocês quiserem fazer perguntas específicas sobre arte, a Pérez está aqui para...
Just the last one. Landscape, very nice. Go down. Okay. This one's the best one. But then one more. One more. Okay. This one has a little different story. It was once part of the package she was claiming. It's a friend of hers. She's mentioned in the movie, actually. But the courts decided on this one that another Holocaust family had a better case. Now, this is a very suspect case, and I'll tell you why. When discovery, use that term here also? Discovery, interrogatories, things like that. When discovery was going on, the main witness in favor of this family was an older woman could hardly remember anything except for the painting. You wonder, I don't want to say it's for judges that lawyers sometimes could prepare clients to tell things, but it was really weird. There were things she didn't know. Oh, that painting that was on that wall in the Lex, always suspect. It was a nice family, and it's hard to argue, with that. And the judges were fair. And that was a story. That was the story of this painting. Now, let me tell you briefly, because you know the story, and there's a few other stories I want to tell. I don't want to dominate time here. The story of the case of Maria Alban. So first of all, I told you. Okay.
Esse quadro, a Maria Altman, ela reivindicou um conjunto de quadros, não foi apenas o quadro A Dama Dourada. Né? A Dama Dourada tem um significado simbólico, etc., mas foram vários quadros que ela reivindicou. E esse era um dos quadros, né, reivindicados, enfim, ela teve sucesso e agora vai...
Oh, we're talking about the case now.
Ok.
They've seen the
Aí ele vai falar do caso especificamente, né, dessa reivindicação dos quadros pela Maria.
But I'm going to assume that they know a lot about the case, because we're going to talk about some of the other cases also. So okay. I'll summarize it.
Bom, ele vai falar um pouquinho do caso da Maria Altman, mas ele vai falar também sobre alguns outros casos, né? Então, ele está partindo do pressuposto de que muitos de vocês assistiram ao filme e conhecem um pouco do caso da Dama Dourada, porque ele vai agora fazer considerações sobre alguns outros casos semelhantes.
Maria was living in Austria at a time when Austria was a cultural paradise. Vienna was, Freud, almost any name you can think of, Randy's grandfather, Schönberg, and lots of other people. So it was a cultural paradise. And at the time, there were many young artists who were supported by rich families. And Klimt was supported by the family of Maria, her aunt and uncle, the Bloch Bauers. They were among the richest people in Austria, and they were among the richest people, actually, certainly in the Jewish community. And they supported Klimt. And because they supported him so well, he gave them these paintings that were put on the wall of their house in Vienna. Beautiful house, beautiful wall, put it all there. And Klimt died just after, I think it was just before, actually, the armistice in World War I. So he died relatively young. He had time to have a bunch of children because they kept coming up later on. But that's a whole other story we don't get into right now. Particularly in this is a Catholic country, right? You gotta be very careful. Anyway, so they supported Klimt. They had the paintings on the wall. And then Maria's aunt died about 1925, natural causes. Very young, though. The husband, the uncle, was distraught. He set up a room in the house as a kind of memorial for his wife. So what you saw in the movie was not totally accurate because the paintings were actually closer together, but they were hanging there for quite some time.
Bom, a Áustria, nas primeiras décadas do século XX, era um país efervescente do ponto de vista cultural. Ele fez referências aqui ao Freud, né? Na área do direito, o Kelsen, nas artes, o Gustav Klimt, né? E vários outros. E na música, né? Schoenberg, que é avô do Randy Schoenberg. Né? Schoenberg é um músico, um musicista muito famoso também, então era um momento muito efervescente. A família Bloch-Bauer é uma família que foi um tipo de mecenas do Gustav Klimt. Então a família ajudou a financiar o trabalho do Gustav Klimt durante muitos anos, e por isso o Gustav Klimt presenteou a família Bloch-Bauer com alguns quadros, né? Que são os quadros que posteriormente foram reivindicados pela Maria Altman.
So, we're living in Austria at the time, and his wife had died, and Mr. Bloch-Bauer was a widower for many years. And in 1938, the Austrians joined with the Nazis. Now, it's very interesting, because when we got to the federal courts, one of the arguments the Austrians made was that they were victims. All you need to do is see the movies of the German troops coming in with the permission of the Austrians, and everybody kissing babies and the like. You know they weren't victims, but it's interesting they characterized it that way. We had Kristallnacht in Germany, we had awful repression in Hungary, we had everything going on all over the world, but in Austria it got terrible, really terrible. And one of the things that happened is they cataloged all the Jewish possessions, and they took them, virtually everything, and of course people went to concentration camps. Now, if you saw the movie, you saw what happened. It was taken by the Germans, including the cello. The escape, okay, a few little things. I promised last night I'd give a few details, but I don't want to, ruin it for you because the movie's really good. But they didn't have to escape the way you saw in the movie. They got out, with some permission. Movies in Hollywood, as my friend here knows, are often given glamorous endings and, pensions of endings, but they didn't have to escape. They went there. The other thing that you should know is that her father actually passed away before she left. But in the movie, they portrayed it that way. And the reason, the producer of the movie told me once, the reason that was done that way was that so many people had to leave their families that they wanted to show that symbolically. And I think they did show the Holocaust symbolically. The doctor's wife scrubbing the street, the little kid having his curls cut off, those kinds of things. I thought that was really a very effective way of portraying the Holocaust as opposed to just showing brutality. This is brutal enough in terms of what happened.
Well, quando a Áustria, na visão dele, a Áustria aderiu ao nazismo, né? Apesar de muitas vezes os austríacos terem um discurso de vitimização em relação à ocupação nazista, na verdade, quando a Áustria foi anexada à Alemanha, isso em grande medida teve o consentimento dos austríacos. O discurso dos austríacos como vítima veio muito mais depois da Segunda Guerra Mundial. E quando houve essa anexação, os nazistas haviam catalogado as obras de arte, e não apenas obras de arte, tudo aquilo que poderia ser confiscado das famílias judaicas.
Joined them. Right. And in Germany, there was something called a Kristallnacht, which was a night of the last terrible in Germany. A terrible, horrible experience.
Bom, pois o que você tinha falado no sim. Aí ele fez algumas considerações sobre o filme, né? Há no filme uma série de a gente poderia dizer que são licenças poéticas, né? Os fatos que efetivamente aconteceram, eles não são narrados com exatidão pelo filme, porque o diretor, né, disse ao Tom que o objetivo era criar um símbolo sobre a ocupação nazista na Áustria e a relação dos nazistas com as obras de arte. Então, alguns fatos são efetivamente modificados para dar maior concisão dramática ao filme, né?
In fact, Maria had to get her husband out of Dachau. They had put him there trying to force the family to give back the valuable paintings, right away. And by the way, the Germans, the Nazis, the Austrian Nazis, they were just phonies about legality. The judges would be aware of this. They wanted to be framed in legality. So what they said is they have a tax on the Jewish families and their property. And the tax was normally 100% of the value of the property, so you can imagine. And was seized even without, doesn't even get a chance to pay it or anything else like that. But so it became very dangerous. Maria did leave. She and her husband came to America. They started a new life in California. And he was a good singer, very good singer. And she opened a clothing store in Beverly Hills and lived nearby, raised 3 kids. Okay. After World War II, her uncle had fled to Switzerland. He lived, the guy, the widower, he fled to Switzerland. He tried to get the paintings back because they were in something called a trust. So he went to the Zurich courts and he said, look, it may be a German institution, but it's a trust under Swiss law. We can pay back. They, of course, said the Nazis won't let us do anything like that. The Nazis held on to them. So he died virtually penniless, but at least he lived out the war. So after the war, Maria's left in California, and she has a couple of siblings. And she decides, she's one of those rare people who does care about trying to get the culture and property back, even at that early stage, because fortunately she lived and the siblings lived. So she hires an Austrian lawyer, and they try to get the valuable paintings back. And the lawyer has tremendous difficulty in Austria. There's a law in Austria passed at that time that says you should return paintings and other valuables to the rightful owners, but the Austrians don't care about the laws. And the Austrians tell her lawyer, look, we'll give you back a few of these smaller pieces, which have some sentimental value, but we're keeping the big ones, and please sign a release. And so she had to sign a release. And under duress, again, I'm in a group of judges, so we don't have to talk about law. They know more than I do. So basically, so she signed it, and that was it. I mean, in the 1940s, late 40s, that was it. She then went to raise her family, do everything else like that. You fast forward to the 1970s, and Maria's family was friendly with Randy's family. Randy's grandfather, you know, if you saw the movie, maybe generally, is Arnold Schoenberg, okay? Don't tell Randy this. I find his music a little strange, but I didn't say that. Okay, no, I didn't say that publicly. I think Randy does as well, but obviously well-known and very talented. And he did some, I don't want to be a music guy here, because I can't be, but he did some things, he did an opera actually, in the early part of his career, that's quite different, you know. Anyway, so the families,
Bom, a Maria, perdão, a Adele, ela tentou recuperar essas obras após a Segunda Guerra Mundial. A Adele. A Adele. A Adele depois da Segunda Guerra. Ela tentou. Não, a Maria isso, ela tentou depois da Segunda Guerra. Desculpa, a Adele não, o marido da Adele. Desculpa. Ele tentou. Maria.
Look, this guy is the best. I've spoken all over the world. This is the best translator I've ever had.
Então, o viúvo da Adele tentou recuperar, né, após a Segunda Guerra Mundial. E o governo austríaco, ele tinha assumido o compromisso de devolver aquilo que havia sido confiscado durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial, mas ele usava uma estratégia, devolver pequenos objetos de pouco valor, e como muitas vezes as pessoas da pós-guerra precisavam de dinheiro, né, elas acabavam assinando qualquer documento que lhes permitisse reaver alguma coisa e lhes garantir a sobrevivência por algum tempo. Então, é isso que aconteceu depois que o marido da Adele foi reaver bens que haviam sido confiscados. A Maria, por sua vez, que fugiu de uma forma um pouquinho diferente do que está no filme, do que está retratado no filme, né? A Maria, ela já vivendo nos Estados Unidos, ela decidiu por um outro caminho, que é exatamente como o Donald vai contar.
Okay. In the 70s, as background, I explained to you that Maria's family was friendly with Randy's family. And she was talking to Randy, who was a young lawyer at the time, about this whole situation. And her sister had died, as you saw in the movie, and there were some papers that she found this totally interesting. And unlike the movie, Randy didn't turn to her and say, I don't know anything. I mean, you know, you're a bright guy, and he had some idea of sovereign immunity and the like. We both were able to deal with jurisdiction later on. So anyway, so there's a conversation, several of them actually, and Maria tries to sue in Austria. Remember, there's a statute. By the way, of the 10 or 11 countries that were overrun by the Nazis, almost everyone, with the exception of Poland, has a statute that says, give the property back if you find it. Right? Austria had one, but they had ignored it for a while. And so Maria does, I'd like to sue. And they say, fine, we'll be glad to hear your lawsuit, but you have to put up as security almost every one of the assets that you have. And she wasn't a wealthy person, but in any event, 100% of the assets, they call it security, of course, but silly. They wanted to put up the whole thing. We appealed that, and the upper court said, no, you don't have to put up that much, maybe about half, you know. And the Austrians, being the nice, warm, loving people that they are, said, no, we're going to appeal the half. We want the whole. We want to go back up to the highest court in Austria and get the whole. And at that point, Maria says, we're out of there.
Então, a primeira tentativa da Maria Altmann foi contratar um advogado na Áustria. Mas, para viabilizar um processo judicial na Áustria, para reaver esses quadros, ela teria que pagar uma caução muito alta, né? E eles solicitaram, então, que houvesse uma redução da caução, né? Mas o governo austríaco ele insistiu, né, no pagamento integral da caução para que pudesse haver o processo judicial.
I don't remember, but originally almost all of her assets.
O valor correspondia quase que ao valor dos quadros, então um valor muito exorbitante, e ela não tinha condições sequer de entrar com a ação judicial na Áustria por não poder arcar com essa caução.
So we're out of Austria. Where's Maria going to go? She had an understanding from before. Everybody made her aware of the fact that it would be very difficult to sue in California. Not that you could sue in California, it's very difficult to win, because as everybody in this room knows, you can't pin jurisdiction on where the plaintiff lives. You have to find a reason to connect the defendant to the jurisdiction that you're in. And we're in California. These paintings have never been in California. So she knew the odds and everything, but she directed a lawsuit to be filed in the district court, federal district court, first level of federal courts, and eventually went to the circuit court of the district court and the Supreme Court. So we went into the district court, and the other side said, you don't have a chance at this. We're going to just blow this away on jurisdiction. And you saw in the movie that Randy predicated it on the fact that there was doing business because there were books about this. What you didn't see in the movie was travel brochures. You know, my house, Randy's house. You get a travel brochure, come visit Austria. Guess what? 2 of those brochures in the year before each had a picture of Adele. Okay, so you know, you talk about we have the expression in America, smoking gun. Where you find something that's so here we are with all this. But they said, oh, it's too remote. Still, it's too remote. And we made the argument. The district judge did go for us. She was a woman. Maria did say, I told you guys we should have more women judges. And if they're all like Judge Cooper, who passed away not too long ago, then nothing could be great. There's a lot of stuff, you know, that she's an amazing person, as I started to tell you.
Bom, então, diante dessa dificuldade de promover a ação na Áustria por causa do custo, seria complicado também mover essa ação na Califórnia, que é onde a Maria Altmann morava, porque a regra no direito americano, como de resto em vários países do mundo, né, é que a competência, né, é do juízo do domicílio do réu, né, e não o domicílio do autor. Então, a Maria Altmann morava na Califórnia, ela não poderia, em princípio, mover a ação na Califórnia, já que o réu seria o governo da Áustria. Ocorre que foi encontrado, né, pelos advogados do escritório do Dom, e o filme mostra especificamente o Randy encontrando livros do Museu Belvedere, que é onde as obras estavam, né, em Viena, e nesses livros existe uma fotografia, né, dos quadros do Gustav Klimt que seriam reivindicados pela Maria Altmann. Então, a comercialização desse livro, né, um catálogo de obras de arte, né, a comercialização desse catálogo pelo Museu Belvedere em território americano significa que havia atividade comercial desenvolvida no território americano e que, portanto, eles poderiam, o Museu Belvedere, o governo da Áustria, poderia ser acionado em território americano, foi o que eles fizeram, uma corte distrital, né? Foi apresentado o caso a uma corte distrital. O julgamento foi realizado por uma juíza e no filme a Maria Altman teria dito que deveria haver mais mulheres no Poder Judiciário, porque é uma juíza que acata o argumento de que a ação poderia ser movida em território americano.
So, in the first procedure ruling, the court said we had jurisdiction. They appealed this to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is probably the equivalent of your Federal Court of Appeals, same thing. We call it circuits, because in the old days they used to ride horseback on the circuits. And we won 3-0 before that court. At this point, when you go before the circuit court in the first place, you go before 3 judges who pick that. If the case is important enough and enough justices vote on it, they can take it on bank. They can take the whole court and do it. So the Austrians tried to bring it on bank, and they had an interesting ally in the form of the United States of America. The U.S. decided to enter the case against Maria, not because Bush was anti-Semitic. I don't believe that he was. I think the reasons were twofold. One, at the time, we were in a position where we had some international conflict, and we apparently needed Austria. The railroads went through Austria. The second and more important reason was that the Bush administration wanted no limitation on executive sovereignty. They wanted to be powerful, not quite as powerful as Trump was, but they wanted to be powerful in terms of what was going on. And there were cases filed at the time in our wake. The French case against the French railroads for transporting people to the concentration camps. A Japanese case against Japan for making Korean women into sex slaves. Italian case based on insurance. So there are quite a number of cases that were filtering into the American ranks, and the argument that, none of them really made it in the end, but the argument they made at the Supreme Court was, it's too wide, too consequences of that. So they decided to try to unbank.
Bom, então, na Corte Distrital foi reconhecida a competência de cortes americanas para julgar o caso proposto pela Maria Altman. Houve um recurso, né, e no caso de cortes federais, né, os tribunais regionais federais, lá se chamam Circuit Court, né, que abrangem diversos estados no âmbito da jurisdição federal. E a questão ela ganhou uma dimensão maior porque havia o envolvimento do governo da Áustria. Então, um dos argumentos apresentados contra a Maria Altman é de que aquilo não era apenas uma discussão de direito de propriedade. Na verdade, aquilo envolvia conflitos internacionais, né? E isso alcançou também o governo Bush, porque o governo Bush ele queria que o poder executivo tivesse maior autonomia para solucionar litígios que envolvessem estados estrangeiros, que esses litígios não fossem solucionados no âmbito do Poder Judiciário americano, que se solucionados no âmbito do Poder Executivo, ele poderia dar o melhor caminho sob o ponto de vista da segurança nacional, estratégia militar, etc. E havia outros casos também envolvendo estados soberanos sobre matéria da Segunda Guerra Mundial, como, por exemplo, o governo francês por ter permitido que as ferrovias francesas transportassem presos para os campos de concentração, né? O governo japonês por ter abusado de mulheres coreanas durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial, enfim, várias questões que, se levadas ao Poder Judiciário, se decididas pelo Poder Judiciário, restringiriam a autonomia do Poder Executivo para decidir essas matérias de acordo com as conveniências das relações internacionais dos Estados Unidos. Então, o caso acabou ganhando uma dimensão bem maior por todas as questões paralelas envolvidas.
The court turned them down. There's a lot of stories about it. The federal government sent people to kind of lobby. Not supposed to do that with judges, of course. They sent people to lobby. But what had happened is I had clerked for the chief judge of that court, Jim Brown. So off the record, I did a little lobbying myself. There was another lawyer on the court, a woman that I've known for many years. She was in my mother's Girl Scout troop a long time ago. So I felt comfortable talking to people. I didn't do it alone. I mean, the court decided not to take it on that. And so the other side says, okay, we're going to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, in America, very few cases can automatically be appealed to the Supreme Court. Most go on what's called a writ of certiorari. We use that word, just a fancy word, but we want you to take our case, review it. It takes 4 justices to review the case, not to win it, but to review it. They got 4 votes pretty quickly, as we thought they would, because it was a publicized case involving the United States, so it's going to the Supreme Court. And everybody says, you guys did a good job, congratulations. You can tell your grandchildren, you almost won. Because everybody said, Supreme Court, Grant quiz, the government people, everything else said that, not going to happen. Scalia and Thomas vote together, it's a long story. If you know much about American current Supreme Court history, you can relate to what I'm talking about. But, you know, we prepared for the case, and went up there, Randy did a great job. I had a very special role, by the way. I sat next to Maria, and I made sure that she stared at the right justice at the right time. Very important, because the man or the woman might have been thinking something that we wanted to concentrate on. And I had other responsibilities as well, but one of the things was there. Maria was an imposing figure, a very stately figure, much bigger by the way than Helen Mirren, and she wore a hat. She just was really kind of impressive. Court argument is held. Yes, it's true. One of Randy's early questions, not to Chief Justice, but Justice Souter, he asked this question that was off the wall. Nobody understood. You see justices looking around, what's he talking about? So exactly as portrayed in the movie, Randy said, stop for a minute because you're confused. You don't want to tell, one of you guys, I don't understand your question, but it was true. And he asked it, and he looked at the justices. They all seemed to have a sigh of relief about that. And we thought the arguments went reasonably well. The government made the argument that there were too many cases that would be opened up. They call it floodgates in America. And so the case rested. We were told that we'd hear somewhere 6-7 months from there. It's a little bit longer than that. But it's kind of, there's a sort of humorous anecdote to this. I was on firm business. I was going from London to Paris. And I got out of the taxi by the hotel. And the concierge says to me, Mr. Burris, there's a call from your partner. So I ran inside the call. He says, Don, we won. I didn't know what he was talking about. He says, we won. The Dodgers won the baseball game. What happened today? And figured out obviously that was great. He said, we won, and the Paris match representative is coming with wine and cheese, and you're going to be interviewed in English, and they want to do a big story. And then he says, you better not be tired, because at 11 o'clock, the Jewish community wants to take you to this big kosher restaurant in Paris, and they want to interview you. That's kind of funny, because the Jewish interview was all in French, which I know very little about. But all I could figure out is they kept saying, Burris Chauffeur. I figured they would take nice things about it, but it was a really interesting experience. So we won. Now,
Ok.
I'm sorry.
Bom, então, a questão foi para a Suprema Corte. Muitos poucos casos vão à Suprema Corte, né? A Suprema Corte, fundamentalmente, ela decide quais os casos que ela vai julgar, né? Então, são muitos poucos casos. Há um trabalho de bastidores muito intenso, né? Ele usou especificamente, né, a palavra lobby, então um trabalho muito intenso de bastidores para que a questão pudesse, então, ser levada para a Suprema Corte, e ela acabou sendo levada para a Suprema Corte, e há um episódio que é retratado no filme, segundo ele, esse episódio é um episódio bastante próximo da realidade, né? Só que é quando, no filme, né, um dos juízes da Suprema Corte faz uma pergunta que ninguém entende. A única mudança, né, é que aquela pergunta não foi feita pelo presidente da Suprema Corte, que na época era o William Rehnquist, mas foi feita por um de seus juízes, o Souter. O Dom conta que quando saiu o resultado, né, Porque os julgamentos da Suprema Corte não são necessariamente públicos. Então, muitas vezes, houve uma sessão, né? Uma sessão na qual o Randy Schroeder e o Don Burris compareceram, fizeram a sustentação oral, mas o julgamento mesmo não ocorre naquela sessão. O julgamento pode ser, o resultado é, muitas vezes, comunicado posteriormente, foi o que aconteceu. Então, quando o Don estava na Europa, ele recebeu um telefonema do Schomberg comunicando isso, né? E aí houve uma movimentação muito grande da imprensa francesa e da comunidade judaica na França para conversar com o Don sobre esse caso e sobre o resultado que eles haviam conquistado.
I'm very used to listening to federal judges when they order me to do something, so I'm going to be very quick at this point to try to wrap things up. You know, I don't think she hold me in contempt, but I respect her wishes. As you know, the case was decided in Supreme Court procedurally. Then you have to go all the way back to the district court and try it again, another 5 years for a 93-year-old woman. Unlike the movie, she didn't want to do that. We didn't want to do that. But everybody else in America wanted us to spend the 5 years because we had beat the bad guys and we want to take it through the Supreme Court. But as you all know, it's up to the client to do what the client wishes. We had arbitration in Austria, just the way it was shown in the movie. One arbitrated by us, one by the other side, and then they chose a third arbitrator. We ended up about 9 months later winning 3-0. We got theirs. A little footnote on that, how did I find out? This time I'm in Beijing. I'm in a gym in Beijing and Randy calls. Says we won. This time I knew what he was talking about. But he did tell me when we were practicing law, he wanted me away whenever he had to announce important cases. What I'd like to do is, I'm just going to run through with the judge's permission. I want to show you, give you an idea of what's happened in 20 years since.
Bom, então, essa vitória foi fundamentalmente para determinar a jurisdição, né, sobre a questão. E foi definido que os Estados Unidos teriam jurisdição para decidir a questão. Mas, após essa decisão da Suprema Corte, o Randy e o Don, eles optaram por um juízo arbitral na Áustria, né, na própria Áustria. E nesse juízo arbitral na Áustria, eles foram vencedores. Foi reconhecida a propriedade da Maria Altman em relação àqueles quadros.
We found the Picasso painting. We went through years of litigation with people in Chicago. Ultimately, it was settled, and the person who owned the painting, he was the grandson of the first owner. Was able to get $6.5 million for this. He was a law student. Unfortunately, he quit law school because he got $6.5 million. If you got $6.5 million, would you quit law school? Of course not. The other thing about the case, the Banksy case, that's so interesting about this is the opponent, the woman who had bought it with her husband who passed away. Her best friends were named Lonnie and Nancy. They lived in a White House in Washington, D.C.
Ronald Reagan.
So we had a tough fight on that one, you know, in terms of what was going on.
Bom, então ele está falando de outros casos, né? A recuperação desse quadro, do Picasso, né? E um dos quadros que foram recuperados estavam com o casal Reagan, né? Ronald e Nancy Reagan, que foi presidente dos Estados Unidos.
This had been a lost painting, and we found it. So this is one of those examples where I told you later on they come up, and it was found by a group in Europe and they hired us.
Então, muitas vezes o quadro é encontrado, né, em outras famílias ou em outras galerias, outros museus, e o escritório ele é contratado para buscar recuperar esse quadro e trazer para a família que os teve confiscados pelos nazistas.
Good story on this. We wrote to the people who were responsible. They said, we agree, it's a looted painting, we want to pay the family back. We agree it's worth $1 million. We didn't have to do much legal work. We had a contingent fee on that one. Nice. It was pleasant. Nobody really had painting. And it's a nice little painting. Okay. This next one Canaletto, very famous person, did a lot of people found in a museum in France, not Paris, outside of Paris. I called the lawyer for the museum she admitted it was worth about 3 million euros, but she said, we don't have the money. And so they had to raise the money. So I spent a year and a half getting nervous about these people because they couldn't raise the money. I don't know if you've ever dealt with the French, but dealing with the French is an interesting story in terms of what happened. We're just about to say either we give up or we sue in Europe, which is dangerous because we don't know really what the laws are. And I get a call in the early morning from the lawyer. She says, we're sending the money to you, trust again. So it worked out very well for our client in terms of that. I have one question for this. You ready? I go all over the world and I ask this question. Has anybody in this room ever seen a terrible TV program called Desperate Housewives? Oh, you admit it? You admit it? Judges even? Anyway.
Eu não sei o nome do programa em português.
This was the backdrop. This introduced the painting on the channel in America. Up and down. It's a very famous painting by Lucas Cranach. It's a beautiful painting, maybe worth 50 million, who knows what it's worth. This is a case that's going up and down in the federal courts. It's still there in terms of what's happening. Because it was owned by a Jewish dealer, but then Herman Göring took it. And then it went back to the Dutch, and the Dutch sold it to a man in America who said, my family owned that painting, was stolen by the Russians in the first place, you know? You know, every beef stroganoff, you hear that name? Captain Stroganoff. His family developed the stroganoff recipe. I can give you the recipe. Anyway, so he claimed it. It's now in a museum in Pasadena, beautiful place, history. I want to tell you one little thing. There are materials that I put together on the lecture, including the pictures in the letter, and I'm making them available through Jose, who can email them to every one of you. And if you like it as research materials, it's my pleasure and honor to send it. That's the man. Yeah, that's the man who was the guy who was interrogated. They found 1,400 pieces of work there, ordinary apartment there.
Bom, aqui ele está falando de outros casos, né? Então, um caso que, na verdade, um dos primeiros, aquele quadro Adão e Eva, né? Aqueles quadros Adão e Eva, primeiramente foram confiscados pelos russos, né?
There's a book about the paintings we recovered on behalf of the family. That's the same family who had the Adam and Eve painting. So we got a lot back from the Dutch. Interestingly enough, the Dutch government says, we're not sure you have the legal right to these, but you have the moral right to them.
Então, esse é um livro sobre os quadros que foram reclamados, né? Reivindicados.
That's, some lady just wanted to be in the picture here with me because I'm so famous. That's a famous painting we got back. They had a little ceremony at the party.
Esse é um quadro que eles recuperaram e aí é foto, né?
I'm just closing very brief story. There's a story that goes around that Himmler, a really bad Nazi, was interviewed at the beginning as they were slaughtering Jews and stealing property. And they said to him, we understand why you're killing the men, because they can fight you. We understand why you're killing the women, but, you know, because they can get murdered. But why do you have to kill babies, all these horrible sorts of babies? His answer at the time was, because we don't do this now, their grandchildren are going to come back and try to restore their culture. That's my story. Thank you very much, by the way. I'm sorry. Anybody has, however you want to work it.
Só para, né, ele estava falando de uma declaração do Hitler, um dos líderes nazistas, né? Bom, a gente poderia entender por que matar os homens ou torturar os homens, porque eles poderiam lutar contra os nazistas, por que matar as mulheres, né? Porque elas poderiam dar à luz, né, filhos que combateriam os nazistas, mas por que matar as crianças, né? Porque elas no futuro vão buscar recuperar a cultura que nós estamos tentando eliminar, né? Encerra dessa forma.
Everybody have a quick question or an immediate one you want answered?
Bom,
This is that person there. Yes.
Eu queria saber se como que isso afeta a relação diplomática entre os dois países, Estados Unidos e Áustria, no caso?
Actually, it's interesting because while the government in power was being bad, not giving the property, there were many politicians in Austria who favored restitution to Jewish people. You know, like anyone else, they're practical, they get votes. And there's a group, a political party there. The relations were not affected in the end. What Austria did is they opened the Belvedere Gallery 24 hours a day for about a week. And they had a little bit of a semi-nasty note that said, this firm of Burris and Schoenberg did the following, you know. I didn't go to Austria at that time. I didn't think it was a great idea. But it was okay. It didn't affect it. We were afraid, by the way, if we had to take this case all the way and we had a judgment, how do you enforce a judgment against Austria and the United States, you know? They don't carry property around with them. So we were concerned about that. And that would have been a real problem with international relations.
Na verdade, na Áustria há uma divisão. Existem aqueles que são a favor da restituição, né? Então, ele entende que afetou de uma forma bastante secundária, né? Mas que para ele e para o Schoenberg talvez não seja recomendável visitar a Áustria.
Bom, desculpa, eu vou passar a palavra agora para a doutora Roberta, porque nós estamos um pouquinho apertados no tempo. Se sobrar tempo ao final, aí sim a gente abre para as perguntas. A doutora Roberta, ela é historiadora formada pela PUC de São Paulo, com especialização em comunicação empresarial pela Escola Superior de Propaganda e Marketing, pós-graduada em curadoria de arte pelo Senac, criadora do Gabinete Cultural Sundfeld, com experiência na coordenação de projetos, diretora executiva do Museu Judaico de São Paulo e curadora da exposição As Meninas do Quarto 28, sobre arte para crianças no gueto de Terezinha durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Bom dia a todos. Obrigada pelo convite, obrigado, desembargador Lunardelli, obrigado, EMAG, obrigado, Mr. Burris, pela sua presença aqui no Brasil. E poder juntar direito e arte é uma paixão. Faz muito tempo que eu e meu marido tentamos fazer essa correlação entre o direito e a arte, então hoje é um dia bastante especial para mim. O Museu Judaico de São Paulo, ele tem duas áreas diferentes. A primeira é o Centro de Documentação e Memória, um lugar de pesquisa, onde nós temos 1 milhão de páginas de documentos, 100 mil fotografias, 400 entrevistas de história oral. E é um lugar aberto para pesquisadores, tem pinheiros, vocês estão todos convidados para vir conhecer. A segunda área é o museu propriamente dito, que está sendo restaurado e vai ser inaugurado em abril do ano que vem, no antigo Templo Betel, com a Martinho Prado, com a Vaiandava, em 9 de julho. Vocês já devem ter passado e visto a reforma. Nós vamos falar sobre a presença dos judeus no Brasil. Nós queremos mostrar as diferentes maneiras de se praticar o judaísmo, como os judeus são diferentes, como eles foram bem recebidos no Brasil, mostrar o Brasil como um país de tolerância e de inclusão. Na área referente à história do Brasil, nós vamos fazer a presença dos judeus nesses 500 anos. Brasil Colônia, Brasil República, imigração do século XX. E quando chega na década de 40, a gente faz uma quebra no museu, onde a gente vai falar sobre estereótipos e preconceitos, para daí poder entrar na aula de Holocausto. Porque se a gente vem falando de inserção e de tolerância, a gente tem que fazer essa quebra para poder falar de Holocausto, porque ninguém consegue entender exatamente o que foi esse Holocausto se a gente não fizer essa parada. Bom, então acho que aqui se junta com o que o professor Burris estava falando. Em cima do quadro do Clint, eu gostaria de fazer a seguinte pergunta. Ele chamava Retrato de Adele Bloch-Bauer I. Mas quando os nazistas confiscam e levam para o Belvedere, eles trocam o nome para a Dama Dourada. Isso era, de uma maneira, uma forma de roubar a identidade dos judeus. Você quebra o que você tinha antes, você aniquila essa identidade judaica, né? Que é o que os alemães pretendiam, exterminar a cultura dos judeus. E, evidente, de todos os outros que não eram arianos. Os testemunhas de Jeová, os homossexuais, mas mais marcantemente a questão dos judeus. Então, trocar um nome que fazia parte dessa política. Imagina que eles iam colocar a Mona Lisa deles no Belvedere com o nome de uma mulher judia. Então, essa é a primeira questão. E aceitar devolver os quadros que foram confiscados seria uma forma de admitir a pilhagem e a roubalheira que a Áustria fez, né? E a própria conivência do governo com o nazismo. Então, o que eu vou perguntar para o professor Burris é essa questão. Por que os países demoram tanto para restituir essas obras de arte? Porque se eles admitem que eles roubaram, eles estão admitindo que eles foram coniventes. A Polônia é um país que até hoje tem graves problemas em admitir que eles foram coniventes. Eles acabaram de fazer uma lei que mostra o contrário, que não, que eles são ótimos, que eles não fizeram nada, que eles que sofreram juntos. Quando a gente conhece milhões de histórias de como os poloneses, sim, foram aliados dos nazistas e sim ajudaram a matar os judeus. Né? Acho que por causa do adiantado da hora, eu vou colocar 3 questões juntas. O professor Burris pode nos responder. Eu faço a pergunta em português e você traduz? Pode em inglês? Não. Which was the main purpose of the Nazis seizing works of art from the Jews? What explains the resistance of the countries in repatriating the looted paintings? And one more. Was the process somehow a way of forcing Austria to take its responsibility for war crimes, unlike Poland that denies its participation and says that they were a victim of the Nazis?
Okay, let me get them one at a time, okay? The first one was just understand what you're asking.
Which was the main purpose of the
Okay,
Nazis?
Nazi purposes, okay. I would say, and it's only a ranking, I mean, obviously hatred of the Jews and making the Jews into a scapegoat, which somebody makes the Jews, was one motivation. The second one was to destroy the culture, because they really wanted to destroy the culture of every country they owned land. And the third one was greed. They made a lot of money to buy machinery and arms and everything else like that by selling. Imagine if you see multi-million-dollar paintings for nothing. And a fourth one, I think, was just the Nazis wanted to outdo each other. Goring and Hitler, they all wanted to have a big collection of famous paintings. And you got to have another one. That was that Hitler was a failed artist, and he wanted to show, I know better. So that, I think, it's hard to judge between them. But certainly destruction of Jewish people and pure outright greed. Awful. Second one, just the gist of it.
Yes. What explains the resistance of the countries in repatriating the looted paintings?
I think you have to just go into history for that. One of the reasons is that many of the countries that were overrun just wanted to forget about their history. And when Jews came back to live in their houses, in certain towns, in certain places, they were shooed away. Sometimes they died.
Especially Poland.
In Poland especially, right. But not just Poland, other places too. And it wasn't a happy time for them because other people who weren't Jewish had moved into houses. So some of it had to do with the fact that the people wanted to forget about it. Some of it had to do with blatant anti-Semitism. Some of it had to do with practicality. Oh, I'm sorry. Some of it had to do with anti-Semitism. Some of it had to do with practicality. How would they prove where the paintings would go to otherwise? And some of it had to do with bureaucracy. Total, it sounds strange that you rank bureaucracy above human rights, but it happens. I, as a person, I'm going to be getting up there. I'm going to be 75 in September. I have a lot of hair. You notice that? 75. Anyway, for most of my years, I have always asked myself, how could a country like Germany turn itself over to the Nazis and let the Nazis rule? You know, and I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't know why they were so entrenched. And then they would double talk, like Holland in our case. You don't have a legal right, you have a moral right. You can have this one, you can't have that one. So there were interests there that were playing away in terms of what was happening.
We know that in Austria in 1998 they changed the law to give back the looted rights. And it was a kind of RPR, wasn't it?
Yes. What happened was they had a law originally, but they strengthened it some. Virtually every one of the occupied countries, except for Poland. But by the way, Poland has a law now. It's a horrible law. It says what you can't talk about the Holocaust and things. It's horrible. So it's going in the wrong direction. But all countries except for Poland have a statute. But as judges, you would know and understand, it's not self-executing. It's not like you go there and you make an application and you get it. You have to sue under the law. And so they've been very narrow in construing it. We tried. The original cases, we tried to go under the Nazi. We tried to go under the Austrian law, the newer law, and it didn't work because of security. But in the end, the arbitrators, were fair and ruled for us, basically.
So I think you already answered, but was the process somehow a way of forcing also to take its responsibility for war crimes?
I don't think they ever took responsibility for the war crimes. I think what they did, they were forced to give it back, obviously, by legal process and by world public relations. To the end, they would argue that they didn't commit a crime, that it was done by the Nazis who came in there, they had no choice, and they were victims of the Nazis. They tried to do it that way. So Austria's never really did it publicly. Do you remember the scene in the movie where there's a possible settlement, and all they have to do is admit it was wrongfully taken, and make sure that my grandchildren and Randy's grandchildren have a little money. Beyond that, they could have said at the time, they wouldn't accept responsibility. And it's dreadful in terms of what's happening. That's why I say, and I'm very concerned with Jewish people, but beyond the Jewish people, we have to be vigilant around the world about cultural deprivation and about the idea that you can somehow subjugate a people. That's not where we're supposed to be going, One of the most famous people I know, or I heard of, was a baseball player named Jackie Robinson. He was the first black player in America. And I remember one of the sayings he had, he's a real hero of mine, was, you're known by what you leave behind. And I'm hopeful that in my limited instance with the work I'm doing, I'm leaving behind something positive for the people I'm working for and, and people I talk to. So it would be a great legacy to me, if I found out, that some people were inspired in some way to go in this direction. And really, it enables you to be, I know you're judges and I know you're lawyers, and it's very famous and very popular, but we all want to be humanitarians at the same time. I'm sure you are, and I know you will be in the future, so that's really what I think.
And do you know any case in Brazil about restitution of looted art?
It's funny because I spoke in Canada, and then I was hired by, they call them First Nation, the Indians, to get back artifacts. And I was hired by some people in Germany to get some things back. So I've been to other countries. When I was on the plane coming down here, I realized I don't, and I should. In other words, I don't even know what groups, were they Indians or former slaves or something like that, I don't know. I do not know, but I'd be very interested, and certainly our group, not just to get clients, but to help out in some way. We find out about a case, we will often consult. I've been asked to consult, not for money, but just to help people in a situation like that. So I do not, but I'd be interested to see where the law is going on that.
Do you believe that other heirs of Nazi art dealers could be investigated to see if they still have works of art belonging to Jews, as happened to Cornelius Burris?
I mean, I think they should be investigated. I don't know too many heirs of the dealers in that case, but I think that there's rumors. There's rumors that some very big museums around the world have secret chambers underneath. You need 3 locks to open the door, and they have secret rooted paper. I like to think in this day and age that that would be rare. You know, that people, but I don't know. People are greedy. Things like, also, some cases, there's a case Casira in my papers, and I will get those papers to you, where it's Spain is the defendant. They didn't steal the paintings, but the Spanish Museum ended up with them. So you have, they didn't commit the war crime, you know, that they have it now in their possession. So you don't have that issue necessarily.
More questions?
I think there's a young lady there who had her hand up. First row, do you have a
Mais
question?
alguma consideração a fazer? Pode perguntar.
I have one question. What about the restitution of private collectors? Do you have this?
Oh, yeah, I should mention this because maybe I left a misunderstanding. Most of the cases are not museums and countries. That was unusual. Most of the cases are gallery owners or individuals who have the painting. For example, the Picasso case I told you about, where the woman was very friendly with President Reagan, totally, you know, individual from that. So yes, the answer is most of our cases actually involve individuals, and they try to argue, I didn't know, or it's too late, or other things like that procedure. Anybody else with a burning question? You want to get your money's worth? Somebody's buying me lunch, so. All right, you can ask him at some time if you happen to see him in the street. I really appreciated the invitation to come here. I'm going to go north. Where am I going? To João Pessoa, and I'm going to chair a lecture for 3 days on art and culture. And I'm really excited about that, although I was just equally excited to speak to the Court of Appeals. Thank you so much.
Passo a palavra do Dr. José Alfredo. Bom, não havendo mais perguntas, então, gostaria de agradecer por terem aceito o convite, por terem vindo. Obrigada pela exposição brilhante, foi um prazer ouvi-lo. Gostaria de agradecer ao Dr. Inês, ao Dr. Lunardelli, por terem me convidado para coordenar aqui os trabalhos. Agradecer à JUFESP pelo apoio, a presença da Caroline aqui na mesa. Não havendo mais questões, então eu declaro encerrado o evento. Obrigada mais uma vez.
When I come back from a federal court case and I tell my wife the judge said something nice about me, I really feel good. So I assume there was something nice.
Eu acho uma coisa muito chata, porque normal tem gente que não tem ninguém chegando.